Figure 3.1, defining a class with a member function. In this example, we're going to demonstrate how to create your first class in C++. Now, C++ is an extensible language, and basically what that means is that you can add your own new data types to the language. In the previous lesson, we showed you just a couple of simple C++ programs, and in one of those programs, we showed you how to declare variables. In particular, we declared a couple of variables of type int, which is one of the built-in C++ data types that represents whole number values that have positive and negative ranges. In the case of an int, on most systems, an int is typically 4 bytes, which means it can represent values in the range plus or minus 2 billion and change. But an int could also be 2 bytes on some systems or 8 bytes on others, or it completely depends on the type of hardware that you happen to be using. And as the hardware becomes more and more robust over the years, it's possible that an integer could be larger than 8 bytes as well. In this program, like I said, we're going to be defining our first class, a class called Gradebook, and we're actually going to be building up this class over a series of examples. The data type called Gradebook is going to represent information about a gradebook that an instructor might use when teaching a class to keep track of information for the students in the class. Now, the version that we're going to be looking at in this series of examples in Lesson 2 is specifically geared to introducing some of the basic features of a class, and we'll continue to enhance this over the next several lessons, and eventually we'll finish up this gradebook case study in the arrays lesson, where we'll store inside of a gradebook object an array of information that represents grades for students in the class, and we'll do that with a one-dimensional array initially, and then eventually with a two-dimensional array where we can store the grades for many students across a series of exams. So first, let me go ahead and just run this program to show you what it's going to do. In this case, it's just going to be displaying the string "Welcome to the Gradebook," so it's not all that much more complex than what we did in the very first program in Lesson 1, where we just displayed "Welcome to C++." Now, the key difference in this example is that we're going to provide you with a basic framework for a class and a main method that allows you to test that class. So you can see here we have a single source file in this example, fig03.1.cpp. And in the example, like we did in the previous ones, we start with a couple of comments indicating the figure number and file name and the purpose of this example. Now, in this particular example, the class will contain one member function, which we will call to perform a task. And we'll talk about that more in just a moment. As we did in prior examples, we're including the IOStream header file, and that's going to give us, in this example, access to the output capabilities. This is not going to be an interactive example. And in particular, we'll be using in this example from the standard namespace the cout object to perform output and the endl stream manipulator to allow us to output new line characters and flush the output buffer. Now let's take a look at our main function first, which we know is the starting point for a program in C++. When main executes, it's going to create a variable of the data type gradebook called myGradebook, and this creates and allocates memory for that object. And then we're going to tell that object to perform a task. We're going to say to myGradebook, display message. And when we are telling an object to perform a task, what we normally do is we use the dot operator, which is the, let me just undo that there. The dot operator is what we call the member selection operator, and it allows you to tell an object to use one of its members, in this case the display message member function. When we call a function, we call it and specify the arguments that it requires to perform its task in parentheses, and in this case there's nothing in the parentheses, so this particular method does not require any arguments to perform its task. We refer to this line as sending a message to the myGradebook object. The message, or member function call, is the member function display message. In this case, when we tell an object to perform a task, it goes and does that task and then returns control, in this case, back to the main function. Now, in the previous example back in Lesson 1, we showed you how to declare int variables. And again, int is a built-in data type. Here, we're declaring our own data type called gradebook, and before we can use that type, we have to define that type. And that is the purpose of lines 9 through 17. In this case, we have a class called gradebook. Now, a couple of things here about syntax. When you are defining a class in C++, it always starts with the keyword class. And by the way, notice that the IDE puts all of the keywords in this blue color, and comments are in green. Regular text is in black, strings and other literal values are in red, and we may see other colors as we proceed through the book as well, or through the live lessons as well. So we have this class, and we're calling it gradebook. And when you name a class, by convention, you use a capital first letter for the classes that you create, and each subsequent word in the class name is also capitalized. So grade and book are both capitalized in this identifier. A class is delimited by a set of curly braces and terminates with a semicolon. So it's extremely important that you remember that semicolon. That is the source of a tremendous number of common programming errors. And as we get to later in this particular lesson, we're going to start showing you how to break up your class definitions from the main program, and also within a class we're going to be breaking it into multiple source code files, as you'll see. And when you forget that semicolon, it can cause all sorts of compilation errors that are actually somewhat difficult to understand. So it's extremely important when you create a class to always remember to include that semicolon. And towards the end of this particular video, I'll show you a way that you can add a class to your project where it will automatically put in the curly braces for you and that semicolon as well, and that will help you remember to put it in so that you don't actually accidentally wind up getting those compilation errors that I was talking about. Now, in this particular class, we have a section called public with a colon. This is a label, and public is a so-called access modifier. Anything that shows up in the public section of your class is publicly available. And basically what that means is that any client code, such as main, that has access to the definition of class gradebook is allowed to create objects of that class and to invoke the public member functions of that class. So basically anything that you want to provide as functionality to the users of your class, you're going to declare underneath a public access modifier label in your class definition. And you can actually have many public access modifier labels. In some programming languages like C# and Java, every single item that you want to declare as public is preceded by the public keyword. In C++, we have these labels under which we list all of the items that should be public, and typically those items are going to be member functions, although they could be data as well, and we'll talk about that more as we proceed. Now, in this particular class, we have just one member function in the public section of the class. It's a member function called display message, and by convention, member functions usually start with a lowercase letter, and each subsequent word is capitalized for readability. So display is lowercase, message has a capital M in it. Like any other function that you'll define, you can specify parameters to a function. In this case, this particular method, or member function rather, does not contain anything in parentheses, so we're saying that it does not require any arguments to perform its task. For those of you who may be coming from the C programming language, this is the equivalent of saying left parenthesis void right parenthesis, and you can do that in C++ as well, but you don't have to, and it's not considered the idiom for C++. This particular member function returns void, saying that it performs a task and then simply returns control to its caller. And in the body of this member function, we have a cout statement where we will simply be outputting welcome to the gradebook exclamation point, followed by an endl stream manipulator, which is going to output a new line character and force the output to be sent to the command line. So again, we've defined a class. This is a new data type. Once you have a new data type, you can use that data type to declare one or more variables in your program. In this case, we have one gradebook variable called myGradebook, and we're telling that gradebook variable, that myGradebook variable, excuse me, to call its display message member function. And again, in object speak, if you will, we refer to that as sending a message to the myGradebook object. And I'll just execute this program once more to show you that in fact we display welcome to the gradebook. Now, I promised you that we would show you at the end of this example how you can add a class so that you don't accidentally forget to put in the semicolon. And in fact, what we would do is right-click Source Files and select Add Class. And you can see here C++ class is the option that's already selected. And when I click Add, I get this dialog, this wizard that allows me to create the class. So let's say I want to create a class called test. By default, it's going to create a header file called test.h and a source code file called test.cpp. And if we simply click Finish, you can see that test.cpp already exists in my project because I had created a test project earlier with you when I was demonstrating how to use Visual C++ 2010 Express. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Yes to these dialogues, and now you can see that there's a header file called test.h, and notice it has a class called test, and notice the ending semicolon. We'll talk about these other member functions when we get later into this chapter and also into our subsequent classes chapters. But you can see that we have the header file and that it has defined the test class. We also have a corresponding CPP file that has some code in it. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove these from our project. In fact, we're going to also remove the test.h as well, just so that we go back to the original project here. As we proceed into developing more robust class definitions, we can revisit that capability of adding a class to your project.